This episode is brought to you by LaFosse Academy, a program dedicated to helping people from diverse backgrounds break into the tech industry. They don't just train you with the skills you need, they help you to land your first role, give you real-world experience and a strong foundation to launch your career in tech. For businesses, the Academy offers a way to build diverse, future-ready teams while creating opportunities for talented individuals who might not have had a traditional route into tech. So, whether you're looking to start a career in tech or you're a business leader ready to build a stronger, more diverse team, speak to LaFosse Academy and take the next step. At Elevate Colour, we're proud to share their mission to level the playing field and create a tech workforce that truly reflects society. Hi everyone, welcome to Race to the Top with me, Oki Lazu. On this podcast, I'm going to be talking to the amazing leaders and their journeys to the top to show that leaders come in all colours. My guest today is Sir Trevor Phillips, a legend and giant in the battle for racial equity. Trevor is a writer and a TV producer. He presents Sky News' flagship Sunday morning politics show, Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips, and is a Times columnist and shortlisted for Comment Writer of the Year in 2020. He is also co-founder of the data analytics consultancy Weber Phillips, chairman of Green Park Interim and Executive Search, and a non-executive director of the AIM-listed behavioural science consultancy MindGym. He also chairs the Global Freedom of Expression Campaign charity Index on Censorship. Previously, Trevor was a president of the John Lewis Partnership Council and founding chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And that's a brief description of what Trevor's done over the years. So, welcome, Trevor.
Thank you. Okay, good to be with you.
Oh, Sir Trevor? Trevor?
No. As I think I've said to you before, we only use titles in our house when accompanied by a horse and a damsel in distress.
Oh, right, yeah. And a puddle and a cape to cross, shall I cross Sir Trevor? But it must, I mean, not a question, but it must have been an amazing thing to become a Knight of the Realm as a person of colour.
Well, look, it's a great honour to have the recognition, and people can be sort of rather cynical about the flummery of it and all of that, but actually, the ritual that goes with it is it's more than just the day. It means that you are in some way admitted to a company of people, many of whom are very distinguished, but who in a way represent what is thought to be good about the society. Because you don't get the gong, by and large, just for hanging around,
no,
or just for having had a particular job. There are lots of people who do important things who don't get the gong. You get it because the machinery that decides on these things is persuaded that maybe you've gone a bit above and beyond, and that you've also contributed something to the fabric of the nation. What I suppose in my family we might say you've done a bit to add to the soul of the nation, and that's that's a thing to be proud of.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that there's one of the things that's really struck me over the period that I've started in this space is the idea of being a role model and something that other people can aspire to achieve because they see it, be it. This is why we have the podcast Race to the Top. How do you consider it from a role modeling perspective?
Well, I've got a very particular slant on or opinion about role modeling, which is not 100% pro. I think it's very important for people to see what's possible.
Yeah.
I think that there are two things which I think we just need to caveat this about. First of all, offering people role models who do things that most people never get to do is a bit of a mistake. Most of us are not going to be, let's say you want to be a footballer, most people are not going to become Jude Bellingham or Ian Wright or Patrick Vieira.
Yeah.
So I think that offering unrealistic role models can be a mistake. Offering role models, and by the way, I think everybody should have more than one. Offering role models that offer a kind of choice of pathways and achievable pathways is a good thing. And that doesn't mean, dialing down everybody's ambitions, but simply saying, here is something that you could do. Because what is really important to me is not to say, oh, there's somebody who looks like me, which is, I think, is a kind of absurd proposition. What you mean is there's somebody who's black, who has achieved this. It's not quite enough, because what you're then doing is inviting somebody simply to worship at the shrine of a famous person. The point about role models is actually to be able to say there is a pathway to you being able to realize the best in yourself, or the most desirable life outcomes that you can imagine. So pinning up somebody on the wall, or picture somebody on the wall who, frankly, most of us are never going to be. I mean, most of us, I could, for example, say Muhammad Ali is my role model, but I'm never going to be Muhammad Ali. I never was going to be Muhammad Ali. What I can do is learn some lessons from his life, and that's a slightly different idea.
Yeah.
And the other thing I often think about role models is that the truth of the matter is that the most powerful role models are those who are closest to us. Our parents, brothers and sisters. And I think we need to remind people that in some ways, learning the lessons, and some of those will be lessons of failure from those who are close to us that we love and admire for other reasons, is probably the most important thing, rather than, trying to copy some unattainable goal that belongs to somebody else who's not you, not like you, really.
Yeah, it kind of needs to be linked. I kind of, I agree with you. I think for some people, Ian Wright, Muhammad Ali, or Serena Williams is right. So if you're a tennis player and you're pretty good, and you see Serena Williams, that could be you, right? That Coco Gauff exists because she saw Serena Williams dominate that, and she was good at tennis. So she wasn't just like, I can't hit a tennis ball, I'm going to be Serena Williams. She was like, I think I'm pretty good at tennis. Maybe I can be Serena Williams, which I think, I agree with you, is something different. But yeah, those around us are the ones that inspire. And that's why it's, again, for me, so there's this talent thing, sports and TV, but then there's just what I call ordinary jobs, being a manager, being a leader, I'm like, loads of people can do that. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who do those jobs, right? And so if you see people doing that job, that could be you, right?
Yeah, and even if it's a stranger, and the other thing, by the way, which I think we should be frank about, is that the tendency to assign a role model to a person of color who is of the same ethnic background, I know what it's meant to be. It's meant to demonstrate that your color shouldn't hold you back and so on. The truth is, if your parents haven't, or your family hasn't told you that already, no number of role models is going to convince you of that. But also, it's limiting. I mean, the truth is, by the nature of the society that we've lived in, by the nature of racism, if you say your role models have all got to be black people, then you're offering a pretty limited range of possibilities, because history, the whole point of it is that history has given us a really quite limited range of possibilities. So in my case, for example, we spoke before we came on about the Sunday morning political interviewing show
Yes.
that I did. There isn't a black role model. I'm the first person of colour to have done that particular job.
Yes.
So the role model for me is kind of don't do it, because that person doesn't exist.
Yeah.
In my particular case, the role model for me in the job that I do is probably David Dimbleby, who's, in my view, the best ever to have done the particular political interviewing job that I do. And he doesn't look anything or have anything like the background that I have. But in terms of what I aim to do, I can watch him, listen to him. I've been fortunate enough to get to know him a little bit.
Yeah.
And ask him, how do you do this? How do you do that? And I can't say that I would ever do things in the same way as he did, because we're different people with different backgrounds and so on. But I've learned an awful lot from just watching him.
Yeah. I think that's really, two bits of really great advice, which is you don't really need to have one role model, and actually you build up your own personal sort of bank of role models, and they might be Muhammad Ali because the way he was resilient against challenges, and that's what you want to be. And it might be the person that's the best at doing the thing that you want to do, regardless of what color they are, right?
Exactly.
They're just the best at doing the thing that you want to do, and you want to be like that person, right? And if they're a white woman, that's fine too, right? I've had some of the best bosses I've had have been white females, and I wanted to be as good as they were at what they do. That makes them role models, right?
Exactly.
So I'm with you. I'm with you. But it's interesting what you say about family. So if I take this back a bit up and go back to kind of what made you you. You grew up in it. Well, you had a really interesting childhood because you were born in the UK, grew up in London, but spent some time in Guyana. Is that right?
I spent most of my childhood in Guyana. Yeah.
How long were you? How long were you in the UK before you went there?
Oh well, the first time I was about a year.
Right. Okay.
I was sent. My family came here in around about 1950. My parents already had 9 children between them.
Wow.
And I popped up as the last one here. And I don't think...
So you're one of 10 in your, 9 brothers and sisters, siblings.
Yeah, there are 10 of us, yeah. And my mother, it is said, when she discovered that she is pregnant, said to her friend, "How am I going to tell George that we've got another one?" You do sometimes think, how this happens, don't you, Mum? I mean, honestly. Anyway, but I turned up in 1953. There were that number of us, like most people of our background. We were, people use the word poor now to mean you can't have a second holiday in Mallorca. In those days, what it meant was that you were cramming a dozen people into 2 rooms.
Yes.
And one way of solving that was to send the little ones back to live in the yard.
Yes.
In my case, with my grandmother and aunt. So they sent me back when I was about 15 months, I think. And I spent pretty much all my childhood until I was 17 and came to university in Guyana. I came back for about 5 years, between the ages of 7 and 12. But I've been reflecting recently on the experience, because actually when you're a child, you don't really think about these things. You just go where you're told, and somebody says, "Oh, you were going to see your mummy and your daddy," and you say, "Okay, fine." You get on the boat, and then you go. But I was reflecting what a peculiar childhood it must seem from the outside, though
Yes.
it never felt peculiar to me.
Yes.
But just as a sort of example, I think when I arrived, I went to Guyana when I was what was then still British Guyana,
Yeah.
when I was a bit more than one, and then they brought me back when I was 6 years old, a bit more than six. Came on the boat with my grandmother, and I think I had to be shown which of the women who were in the room in the house that we came to was my mother.
Right.
Now, it, I think it was a little bit confusing for me, but I got past it pretty quickly. I think it didn't. I don't feel that I was traumatized in it in any way.
You kind of accept it
But
as normal as a child. You're like, that's just normal, right?
well, yeah, but of course now looking back, I realized it wasn't normal at all,
Yeah.
really, to be in that situation. For most children in this country.
Yes.
However, of course, for most people by migrant background, some experiences
Yeah.
like that are pretty common.
Yes.
I think it's probably even more common for people of West African background than
Yes.
it is for Caribbeans.
Yes. Yeah. 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 And in fact, I had a guest on this not long ago, and we joked about, if you keep misbehaving, we're going to send you home, and home means
Yeah,
home, not to your house,
yeah,
back to
yeah, yeah.
Nigeria or back to Ghana. That you're going back, and that actually really happens. It happens reasonably frequently.
Yeah. Well, in fact, two things about that. It's interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't know that West Africans also had the habit of referring to there as
As home.
home,
Yeah. Yeah.
which we do too.
Yeah.
Even now, 2 or 3 generations on, um, you know, a lot of my family lives in America. If we talk about Guyana, somebody will say, "Have you been home
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
year?"
Yeah. Exactly the same.
And that's
Exactly the same.
exactly what they mean. And the other thing I should say, full disclosure, is that one of the reasons I went back when I was 12, 13, was that I think that my parents, who by that time wanted to go to America
Yeah.
anyway, they wanted to re-emigrate and did. They didn't take me to America because they thought it wasn't the right place to bring up a young black man, and they were completely correct, actually.
Yeah.
You know, New York at that time, not so different to now, but the chances of a young black man making it to 24 at all were quite
Small.
depressed.
Yeah.
And even if you did make it to 24 years old, you'd probably pass through at least one jail or
Yes.
one, and so on. So I think they were pretty clear. They didn't want me there, so they sent me back home.
Yeah.
There you go,
Home. Home. Home.
home, home.
Yeah. And actually, as you say, it's kind of a juxtaposition to when people say, "Where are you from?" and I say, "I'm from London," but my family would say, "I'm sending you home," being Nigeria.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have to sort of manage between those two things. I mean, what's really interesting to me about that is you would have been in your childhood, sometimes as a black person in the majority, and then another portion of time very much in the minority.
Yeah.
How do you think that shaped your thinking? As you know, I mean, literally there, back there, but in good slugs of time, 5 years in the UK, then go back, then come back at 17. How do you think that shaped your thinking as a child about race?
Oh, very, very profoundly. But it can be summed up very, very easily. It's something that one of my sisters said to me 3 or 4 years ago. Um, most my parents re-emigrated to the United States in 1966, 67, and my sisters eventually all went there too. I have 4 sisters who live in New York. And she said a very interesting thing. She said the difference between us, meaning Caribbean Americans, and African Americans is that we were never afraid of white people. It was, I thought, a very, very um, perceptive observation, and never quite thought about it before in that way. Um, I think that my idea about race were very, very strongly shaped by Guyana, which is, by the way, I mean, it's a country which has 6 ethnic groups, and it's a very strong feature of Guyanese society and its way of being and way of thinking of itself, that we do have these um, uh, 6 ethnic groups. I can't quite remember the words, but I think there's even something in the national anthem that refers to the fact that we're a land of many peoples.
Yeah.
So we're very, very aware of it. And of course, conflict between ethnic groups has been one of the things that kept Guyana poor for pretty much all of my lifetime. Guyana is now about to become very, very rich, by the way, because of oil. But it's always been very, very poor. And one of the reasons that it never was unable to lift itself out of poverty was because of conflict between ethnic groups. So that's a second thing to me, that race never quite meant, white people and then the rest of us. To me,
yes,
it's I sat in school, black, Indian, Hindu, and Indian Muslim, and Chinese, and what we would call in Guyana Portuguese, by which we mean Creole whites, as it were, native whites who've been there a long time, and of course the Amerindians, and all of these different groups exist. All of us have views about the other groups, but we are all the whole project of that country has been to try to work out how we work together.
Yeah.
And by the way, most of the time we failed.
Yeah. Well, I won't go into the politics and the similarities with Nigeria, which I know well, but same sort of thing, very tribal,
Indeed.
So people think, oh, it's all black people. I'm like, yeah, but all black people who think of themselves all as completely different, right?
Well, absolutely. And I know enough about Nigeria to know that for a Nigerian, the concept of a Nigerian is a sort of external concept.
Yes. Yeah. Doesn't exist.
But for a Nigerian, the first thought would not be, I'm Nigerian. It might be, I'm from Lagos.
Yeah. Or
by which they mean
I'm
Yoruba.
Or I'm Igbo, or that's the way. That's the way that we think, for sure. So but if we go to the point that is, you even in Guyana, you're in you're surrounded by other people of color, and then you're here and you're surrounded by white people. Did that make you uncomfortable, more comfortable, more uncomfortable? I'm kind of trying to work out this. It was this effectively this moving around became a superpower.
I don't know if it became a superpower. I think it. Again, this is something I think I've learned quite late in life. It may be a bit weird. It made me a person who never really worried too much about what white people think about me.
Yeah,
I think that there is amongst people, particularly those in the sort of in a kind of activist layer, who do think a lot about race. There's, I think, an unhealthy obsession with being thought well of by people who are not people of color.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is a very, very big dividing line between some ethnic group, some different minority groups. You tell me, but I suspect that people of West African background, particularly those who've come from a middle-class background, are baffled by the attention that traditionally Black people in this country, by which we mean African and Caribbeans, give to the sort of the good opinion of their white neighbors. That race is all about making people feel better or warmer towards us, treating us as equals. My impression is of West Africans, particularly Nigerians, is it's quite good if people do think that, but actually in the end, I don't really care.
Yeah.
As long as they don't completely disrespect me or shut me out of opportunities, then they can have whatever view they like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying, my father had this expression, "Manners maketh man."
Manners maketh man. That's right. Yes.
Yeah. I think he also meant it in the specific context that of us as a family. And I think what he meant was there is absolutely no point railing against disadvantage if it's not going to change anything. It might make you feel a bit better to be angry, but it doesn't necessarily get you anywhere. And I think what he really meant was observe the society, look at the people around you, understand them, be as what's the right word, straightforward,
Yes,
open with people, but don't ruffle feathers if you don't have to, because he would never have put it this way, but he would say, these people regard us as visitors. Our position is insecure. If we have to get into a fight, fine, we'll get into a fight. But if we don't have to, don't. And I think that it was wise. It was wise counsel, which I have to say I haven't always stuck to, but overall, it's a smart way to approach things.
and as I don't want to call you an activist. When I was growing up, and
That's fair.
That's fair. Okay, right. Really trying to represent for people of color. Did that sort of manners maketh man sort of bring you back to be more of a I was sort of more Martin Luther King than Malcolm X, more of a statesman than railing and angry, because you must have been in so many situations where actually could have made your blood boil what people were saying. I mean, people still say things to me now, and I'm like, really? Did you just say that? So if you go back to the 70s and 80s, my God, it must have been incredible. That must have been a very pertinent piece of advice.
Yeah, it's a really good challenge, and I think I'd respond to it in this way. It's interesting you make the distinction between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, which I think is the right one. It's interesting, that it is part of the legend, and nobody quite knows if it's true or not. But what the now mighty Marvel Comics empire was basically founded on the idea that there was this conflict between two kinds of characters about how you achieve change. So there's a mutant minority in the world who have all sorts of superpowers, but are victims of prejudice. And remember when this was happening, this was in the United States, 1960s.
Yes.
And Stan Lee creates this universe, and there are two poles in this universe, and one is Professor Xavier, who basically takes the view that the powers of mutants should never be used against humanity, but there should be harmony with humanity, in spite of the fact that humanity basically wants to eliminate mutants. And Malcolm X, on the other hand, who says, you can't change them. They are going to try to eliminate us, and it is war. And we either subjugate them, or we ourselves will be eliminated. The funny thing about this is, if I am completely honest with you, I'm more, if you like, intellectually and also emotionally a Malcolm X guy.
Right. Okay.
I am more skeptical about the capacity of human beings to be kind to each other than the sort of person who would have supported King, my father Actually, my father actually probably might have been more, in a funny way, more of a Malcolm X guy. I'm not sure. Anyway, the point I'm really trying to get to is that irrespective of my political views, the manner in which you behave, the manner in which you prosecute your political views is important.
Yes.
And even if you take Malcolm X, one of the interesting things about him, you watch him on TV, you read his speeches, you look at his persona, always impeccably courteous.
Yeah.
No shouting, and no sort of uh, out of control anger. Maybe suppressed rage,
Yeah.
obviously, but never out of control. Always beautifully dressed and so on. So I think actually, this is a long, rather roundabout way of answering your question, but I think it is possible to separate the sense of anger and disillusion from the manner.
Yes.
And I think some people um, uh, get these things mixed up. And one of the things that sort of, if I can put it this way, separates me from some so-called black activists is that they shout a lot.
Yes.
But what they shout about is, to put it very, very simply, white people, why don't you like us? You must like us. If you and you'd be better if you liked us and behaved um, more nicely towards us. As I've been saying through this conversation, to me that's kind of unimportant.
Yeah.
It's perfectly legitimate for somebody not to like me because I'm black. That's their problem. The question is, what can they do about it? And where we go to war is when they decide they have the power to do something about it. I can't make them like me. And there are lots and lots of reasons, apart from my being black, for people to dislike me. I mean, quite many mornings I can find 3 reasons why I don't like myself. So, not liking me because of my race is not, to me, a mortal sin.
Oh.
It may be stupid, it may be self-defeating, but it's not a sin. What is the problem is whether you can do something about it, which brings me to the point that the way we treat each other, the way we address each other matters. And, the story about race shouldn't be one about black people pleading with white people to like us. They don't have to. What they must do, though, is treat us fairly.
Right. Right. That is the crux. I mean, brilliant. And I've had so many conversations around this. It's the first time someone said, actually, it's not necessarily wrong not to like someone because of the color of their skin. That sounds somehow completely wrong.
Yeah.
You know.
I know. We've come to. I mean, I sort of believe that myself, but I don't think it's a sort of. It is a profound misreading of human history if you think the normal state of things is for people to like each other across the lines of race and ethnicity, because every piece of human history tells you that that is not the natural state of human beings. The natural state of human beings is to like people who are like you, and to be suspicious of people who are not like you.
Correct.
The point about civilization and rationality and the Enlightenment is that we apply our intellect and our socialization to overcome that natural instinct. But it isn't always going to work. And in fact, what we're discovering in politics right now is that, in spite of the fact that people in liberal democracies, I think in the second half of the 20th century, thought that we had sort of begun to banish that idea of ethnic solidarity and tribalism and so on. Actually, we're discovering it's never gone away.
No.
And in fact, if anything, it's even stronger than it used to be.
So if I take that a stage further, and you sort of said, actually, the job that it's okay not to like someone because of their colour of skin, but you must treat them fairly. My question then becomes: is that actually possible? So, is it possible to treat someone fairly who you do not like?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. I mean, that to me is. I mean, it's actually one of the tests of rationality.
Right.
You know, in a way, it's a sort of derivative of the old Voltaire line. I may not like what you say, but I'll fight to the death to for your right to say it. There's a sort of level of there's a self-interest here. I might not like, let's say, somebody because they come from Scotland or they come from Russia. But if I have a project which needs the world's greatest web developer, and the world's greatest web developer is Scottish or Russian, would I be anything other than a complete moron uh, to swallow my prejudice and get that woman or that man?
Mm-hmm.
So no, I think it's completely within. I mean, that is the root of human rationality. That that the that your rationality overcomes your basic instinct,
Right.
because you know what is in your best interest, or the best interest of your family or your tribe. You know, sometimes you got to make a deal with people you don't like.
Yeah. No. And that happens a lot of the time, and it suggests that there's a misunderstanding of, I suppose, a nuanced misunderstanding about what we're trying to achieve in defeating racism.
Yeah.
Right. Well, actually, then how do you
And there's a
define?
misunderstanding about what racism is.
That's what I was going to ask you. So, to you, what is racism?
Well, this is a question I always try to avoid answering. Because it's you, I'll give it a go.
Give it a go. Go on.
I'll give it a go. You know, there's a simple equation, which is that racism is prejudice plus power. I sort of think that there's something in that. I think it's too simplistic, though. Most people, when they talk about racism now, what they mean are acts of racial discrimination. Um, I think that is a pretty limiting and conservative concept. Um, if all that, you know, racism was about was stopping people not putting my job application in the bin, then we've got laws for that.
Yeah.
And what you would be talking about is, do we have the right enforcement mechanism? Do we have culture in our workplaces or schools or universities which picks up on these things? But I think that racism, properly applied, is a much more complex and multidimensional proposition than that. I suppose what I would say is that racism is the elevation of racial difference above all other criteria for human interaction, and the application of irrational prejudice to encounters between human beings. Now that sounds sort of a bit of a mouthful, but essentially what I think of as racism is not people calling attention to racial difference, or people deciding that they don't like somebody because of their color. What I call, what I think of as racism, is when you make racial difference the single or overwhelming criterion by which you make decisions about how you relate to other people, how you build a society, even if it is not in your self-interest. That's
Okay.
what racism looks like to me.
But but that would discount things. So if it's all only about decision making, that would discount things like microaggressions. You know that we hear a lot about. People
Yeah,
in
I don't care
business.
about microaggressions
You don't care about microaggressions. Why do you not care about microaggressions?
because they're micro.
Right. But they make people
And if I
feel.
spent all my life thinking about the small and sometimes inadvertent uh, gestures that people make, I'd have, I'd be having a daily nervous breakdown, wouldn't I?
What if that's important to? So like people touching my daughter's hair upsets her, right? Isn't that important? And that's only as a
Yeah,
result of the fact she has
but
frizzy
I'm sure
hair.
you tell your daughter. I'm sure you'll teach your daughter to be resilient enough to say, "Don't touch my hair."
Yep. Yep. But after a while, that might wear her down.
Not really. People will learn. She doesn't like her hair being touched. I mean, these things are. It would be the same as we learn manners. Coming back to what my father says,
Yeah.
what people call microaggressions, I think, are much more to do with courtesy than they are to do with some deep racial animus. Um, I think it's perfectly, in fact, it's a better way of thinking about these small insults or discomforts, that they are part of the everyday encounter between people, that we should be thinking of them not as a sort of the tip of a vast pyramid of ghastly oppression, but that they are to do with the clumsiness of human beings, the lack of knowledge of other human beings. And that means that what we actually ought to do is to be thinking about how we teach each other. Rather than saying there's a microaggression, let me call in the campus police and have a disciplinary process. What we should be thinking about is, how do we give the person who feels that there's been microaggression the confidence and also the procedure, the behaviors that allows them to say, don't do that, don't say that to me, and here's the reason why I don't like it. Because by and large, I suspect in 9 times out of 10, the person who has um, performed a microaggression has no idea that it's a microaggression, and they only need to be told once.
Yeah. No, I
And
think
I think we need to save our energy for big things.
that I agree. So, therefore, with your years, of leading this fight, generally, and to lots of business people who I work in and around, what is the fight? What are we trying to change? What are we trying to achieve? Where do we
Yeah.
win?
By the way, just to give you a very simple example of how I think these things need to be, the microaggression thing needs to be addressed. I was in a committee meeting, a big board meeting actually, of a big cultural institution. I sat on the board, and we were talking. We're doing the annual diversity survey, and there was some disagreement. I can't even remember what the disagreement was about. And I had made my contribution, said my tuppence worth, and then a chap next to me said, and he, I think, was genuinely trying to demonstrate support for whatever it was I said. And he started his remarks by saying, um, I don't even think of Trevor as black. And I just said, right there, stop right there. Stop right there. Actually, don't think you're doing me any favors
Yeah.
by saying that. Because actually, if you really believe that, what you're really doing is telling me that being black is somehow not a good thing.
Yeah.
So just start your remarks again. Now, he never said anything like that again. And we talked about it afterwards. And I think we need to be able to be in that mode, to get into that mode in the same way as if somebody came into your house and you don't allow smoke. I mean, most people now don't want smoking in their house, and you might say, "Please don't light up in my front room. You can go in the garden." It's not an insult. It's some people might feel it's a bit sort of pretty, but frankly, that's their problem.
Yeah.
They don't have to come around your house if they don't like it. So I think we need to put that microaggression thing in that kind of bucket. The answer to your question about what it is we're really trying to do, I've got to confess, I do tend to think about these things in a slightly arcane way because I trained as a scientist and engineer. So I tend to sort of go to maths and these things.
Yeah.
And what I tend to think is, what is the purpose of anti-racism or equality? Very, very simple. It is twofold. First of all, to make sure that I am not limited in my ambitions or my potential or what I can achieve or attain by any single characteristic, my color or my maleness, or if I had a disability, that disability. That's the simple first principle, that nobody should be limited by a characteristic they can't change.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean, by the way, that characteristic won't steer them into a particular place. Or, I'd be honest and say that generally speaking, if I have a choice between working with people who come from my background, I will tend to just tilt in that direction a bit. And I don't think that's a crime. I don't feel it's a crime.
Right.
I think it's okay. I think it makes my life easier, as long as that doesn't mean I get into the frame of mind where I'll never work with anybody who's not like me,
Mm-hmm.
or doesn't come from the same background. So the first point is that we shouldn't be limited, and that means that when we talk about equality, the aim that you have. For example, I work a lot on the issue of business leadership.
Yep.
I think what is the sign of an unhealthy business is a business where there are no women or no people of color in the leadership. That doesn't mean, though, that I think that there must be 50% of women or 25% of people of color around every table. Because actually, some of us, because of our background, we may choose to go into one sector preferentially rather than another, because we come from families who are really interested in medicine, or who really like finance, or who really care about entertainment. And here culture becomes a factor. So that comes back to my basic point. The point about anti-racism, the point about the equality fight, is to make sure that we are not, or to put it at its very, very simplest, that our destiny is not determined by some accident of our birth.
Yeah.
Maybe I've gone a long way around it, but that's probably the simplest way of expressing it.
And so to you, no, that's really useful. What you've just said, I'm trying to paraphrase, is on the one hand, the fight is for equity. By the way, do you get hung up on equity or equality?
I don't get hung up on the words, but I do worry about the concept, because I think the concept of equity as it is emerging, which is that the good society, the ideal world is one in which every activity is equally uh, performed or carried out by men and women and people of different ethnic backgrounds. I think there's a problem with that because you can't have both diversity and equity.
Right.
The point about diversity is that we bring different things to the table. And because we bring different things to the table, that means that we won't all be as good at doing different things. So to me, that the point, and I'm a diversity guy rather than an equity guy,
right.
The good society is one in which everybody contributes in a way that is natural and favorable to them. You know, I am good at certain things because of me, but I'm also good at certain things because of the background that I come from.
Yeah.
Because I've been inculcated, just very simple, just to take a very simple example, the work that I do is almost all to do with the use of words. Now, it's true, I've probably got some natural facility with it. But I have no doubt that a large part of my capability with the use of words has to do with the fact that I come from a culture which is very verbal, which has the Bible as it's the King James Bible, to be precise, as the background noise, and which really has a sense of poetry in our language. I didn't make that up by myself. That's a thing that I'm bathed in. And so actually the fact that I'm quite good at that isn't just me. It's to do with the fact that that's what I've lived with.
Yeah.
And it's not hardly a surprise that I have a brother who is a novelist. And I have my late brother was probably the best speech maker I ever saw. It isn't just because we might be good at it. It's because of who we are. And that means that we're better than some other groups at doing that particular thing. But we might not be as good with, I don't know, spreadsheets, let's say.
Yeah, who is? Numbers and words.
You probably are.
Yeah, not bad. I wouldn't say too much. Look, I could go on, but I've used up all our time. So I want to ask you a question, though. One question in closing. Hopefully, you'll come back for a part two. Look, my list. I've got loads on my list that I have not even covered. Right. This is I'm like but I ask all my guests this, which is we cover a range of topics and been brilliant with you. In a few words or sentences, could you give me a reason for us to be hopeful about change in this space and for the future? However we define racism and race and equity and equality, why should we be hopeful?
Because all of human history tells us that the survival instinct triumphs. And survival, in the end, means that we have to live together. There are very, very, very rare occasions in which one group of people manages to eliminate another hostile group of people. All of human history tells us that in the end, we reach an accommodation and we get together. And just very, very concretely in this country, we've got an absolute, well, let me rephrase that. This country has embarked on an extraordinary natural experiment which does not exist anywhere else in the world. And what do I mean by that? This is the only country that I've been able to find anywhere in the developed world which has a very sizable mixed race population, now getting on for 1.5 million, 2 million people, which has come about not by coercion, like the Americans I mean, Americans' mixed race population historically has really been out of slavery, same Brazil. South Africa, something different but similar. The mixed race population in this country is very young because it has existed largely since the war. And it has come about entirely by people's individual choices about their romantic partners. And this country has the language, and it's now a natural thing for people to be of mixed race.
Yes.
Whereas in the United States, it's still sort of a bit odd. So anybody of mixed race in the United States is basically black.
Yeah.
And they refer to themselves as that. We would not do that here. So my answer to your question is, in some senses, encompassed in the reality of Britain, where bit by bit, actually, in spite of all the stumbles and the shouting and yelling and all the rest of it, the reality is we're finding a way
To do it.
to live
to come together. Wow, that's so profound. That's beautiful. And I agree with you. It is. We will definitely do a part 2, my friend. I think you've been incredible. You are a legend. It's amazing to spend the time with you.
Well, you've asked me some really profound questions, some of which I haven't thought about before. I hope I've given you some decent answers, and I haven't got myself into too much trouble.
I think you might have. It's dynamite. What you said is incredible, mind-blowing, baffling, just thought-provoking. Wow. The wow is the way we need to end this, for sure. Sir Trevor, thank you.
Thank you.